Captain Midnight.
There's an infamous clip from the behind the scenes of the Phantom Menace documentary where George Lucas and his team sit down to watch a screening of the film for the first time. It doesn't go well, and you can tell everyone's a little uncomfortable with how the movie turned out.
I may have gone too far in a few places.
And we get the editor of the movie trying to deconstruct the problem with the film's climax.
In a space of about 90 seconds, you go from lamenting the death of, a hero to escape, to slightly comedic with Jar Jar, to Anakin returning with his little kind of tag. It's a lot, and it's a very short time.
Boggles the mind.
He was right about the Phantom Menace, and oddly enough, his critique could apply to sections of The Last Jedi too. But I'll get back to that in a minute. It's taken me a while to collect all my thoughts on Star Wars The Last Jedi, and after watching and rewatching it, I'm still having trouble separating how much I respect Rian Johnson's story choices in a lot of places, while having such a huge problem with the execution of those stories. If you had told me before seeing The Last Jedi that it would feature Finn, one of my favorite characters from The Force Awakens, and a new character going to a space casino, in a story that reveals the First Order and the Resistance get their weapons from the same people, I would have thought that sounded great. But then I watch it play out on screen and it's just not. Which is kind of a confusing feeling. Those who watched my video about what I wanted to see in The Last Jedi will probably notice that I got my wishes in a lot of ways. More Poe Dameron, putting Rey and Finn through the ringer, digging into Kylo Ren's motivations, and even questioning the very foundations of the Jedi Order. It had a lot of what I wanted, but it didn't always execute them in a way that I was completely happy with.
It's Princess Leia and Luke Skywalker! Now I know the Force is with us.
Darth Vader.
Let's just dive straight in. Poe's storyline is one of the easiest examples of this. After Leia goes into a Force coma, Vice Admiral Holdo takes over and decides that retreat is the Resistance's best option. Poe, not knowing anything about the abandoned rebel base on Crate that they're going to go to, basically stages a coup and very nearly gets the entire Resistance killed. A lot of people online have pointed out that if Holdo had just told Poe the plan from the start, none of this would have happened. And that's true, but it also goes both ways. The Resistance is structured like a military organization, right? And not once, but twice, we see Poe disobey a direct order that in some cases got people killed. So even though it's easy to say they should have told Poe the plan, it's also worth noting that Poe shouldn't need to be told the plan. That's not really how a military works. And while being cocky and rebellious is a fun part of his character, I just don't buy Leia and Holdo laughing it off at the end. I mean, he staged a coup and barely got a slap on the wrist. This entire plotline was meant to impart a lesson of humility to Poe, and that's actually not a bad starting point for a story. But in execution, all it managed to accomplish was making Poe, Leia, and Holdo look like they couldn't manage an Arby's, let alone a galactic resistance force. What made it even worse is that Leia treats Poe like a leader in the third act, a role that he hasn't earned even a little bit. I mean, he disobeyed orders and got people killed. Come on. And while I don't think that they need to treat the Marvel comics as gospel or anything, Poe Dameron series is really, really good. And in it, he's nothing like the idiot that this movie makes him out to be. So that was disappointing. And what makes this kind of thing so frustrating is that there's also so much I like about these scenes. Holdo's sacrifice, where she silently cuts through all the First Order ships, is an incredible moment, and one of the best looking shots I've seen in a blockbuster since Fury Road. But getting there was a bumpy ride, and it's just one of the many places where the movie has the seed of a good idea. In this case, Poe learns to be a better, more thoughtful leader, but it just can't get out of its own way. I should say though that I really enjoy the Rey and Luke stuff. I know it's making a ton of fans really angry, but I thought that Luke's rebuke of the Jedi Order makes a lot of sense, and it was interesting to finally have some acknowledgement that the Jedi kind of sucked. And I'm talking about the movies here, I don't care how great they were in cartoons or video games or whatever. In the films, yeah, they were a really flawed organization, and it's really interesting to see someone say that out loud in a Star Wars movie. I also thought that the humor in these scenes worked a lot better than it did in most places. Rey literally reaching out to touch the Force, and Luke tossing his lightsaber over his shoulder both landed pretty well. If the entire movie had been in this more balanced tone, where there are jokes but they actually have a character-driven reason for being there, I would have been really happy. I also thought that Luke's death, and specifically the shot of him fading away, framed against the twin suns, was a really great image that brought Luke's story full circle in a pretty moving way. Not only that, but I think Mark Hamill gives a really good performance here. He hasn't done much live action work outside of cameos and The Flash, so I was a little nervous going in, but he sold his character's pain and one-liners equally well. I really liked this bitter, angrier take on Luke. I also really like Rey. I know it was popular to bash her online after The Force Awakens came out, but I think she's a very likable lead, and Daisy Ridley is a pretty great actress. And she got to showcase that more in this movie, especially in her Force-driven Skype calls with Kylo Ren. Basically, I'm saying that all that stuff works for me. The island, Rey and Ben Solo's relationship, and the incredible throne room battle. I never found the question of who Snoke was all that interesting, so killing him off early to avoid a boring retread of the Emperor worked for me. I also liked the non-answer to who Rey's parents were. If they had been like Obi-Wan or Luke, it would have made the Star Wars universe seem hilariously small, and remind me way too much of stuff from the prequels, like the fact that 3PO was made by Darth Vader. It always feels more than a little forced when they do something like that, so I'm glad they avoided it here. And Rey coming from nothing actually makes the Force a lot more interesting to me. It's not some genetic royalty situation that only a few families have, and it would be a lot less cool if it was.
The Star Wars Holiday Special, starring Mark Hamill as Luke Skywalker.
So if I liked this stuff so much, why do I have such a problem with the rest of the movie? Well, going back to our Phantom Menace behind the scenes clip, I think this critique applies to the middle section of The Last Jedi. We have Rey and Luke having serious conversations about the nature of the Force, the Resistance facing down almost certain doom, and Finn and Rose having a casino and space llama adventure straight out of a Saturday morning cartoon. Maybe that's too harsh, because I like the idea behind the story a lot. I even like Rose's introduction, with Finn figuring out that he's kind of a celebrity now. But I just can't get into this casino sequence, which is too bad, because it really feels like Rian Johnson trying something new for the franchise, and I want to encourage that. But the jokes are just not great. Now obviously humor is very subjective, and if you thought the Canto Bight sequences were hilarious, that's great. I'm not trying to take that away from you. But for me, these jokes were just way too broad. I especially groaned at the little CG gremlin putting coins into BB-8, who then launches them at guards later. This was like Attack of the Clones level droid nonsense. Star Wars has always been a very kid-friendly franchise, but that stuff just clashed so hard with the rest of the movie that it reminded me of Episode 1 having to cut back to Jar Jar hijinks right after Qui-Gon died. Though, admittedly, not that bad. Getting back to Last Jedi, I like Benicio del Toro a lot, but underneath all the verbal tics, I just don't think there was much to the DJ character. He was a shady guy that they knew they shouldn't trust, and then, surprise, they shouldn't have trusted him. Then there was the getaway on the space llama things, which was probably the low point of the film for me. The visual effects during the chase just aren't convincing, and they look surprisingly sloppy for a movie this expensive. That's something I'd be willing to forgive if the emotion behind the scene didn't feel so contrived. Between the child actors and the sad animals, it all just felt a bit overwrought and corny. Your mileage on that may vary, but for me it just felt really out of place, and cutting back to this story every few minutes felt like it brought the pacing to a crawl. I really liked Finn in The Force Awakens, and I really hope they have something better for him planned in Episode 9, because this just felt like they needed to give him something to do, even if it didn't ultimately matter that much, and I think the character deserves better than that.
Don't miss The Ewok Adventure, now on video cassette from MGM UA.
It actually took me a long time to write this script, because identifying what made this movie feel off to me was kind of tough. A lot of it will come down to how the jokes land, and that's up to personal preference. There was so much to like about the movie, from Holdo's sacrifice to Kylo Ren's betrayal of Snoke and Luke's last stand, that I really wish the entire film had clicked for me, but it just didn't. Rian Johnson is obviously a talented director, and has a lot of interesting ideas, but I hope for his trilogy, there's another screenwriter there actually writing the screenplays. In the end, I respect what Johnson was attempting in The Last Jedi, but I'm just not sure about the execution. The final scene sums this up so well. A young slave boy with the power to use the Force looks up at the stars, signaling that like Luke and Rey before him, the spark of hope has been ignited. I want to like it, but it just goes for the heartstrings so obviously and so bluntly that it felt emotionally unearned. Am I just getting too cynical for Star Wars? That'd be depressing.